What We Pretend We Can't See by Gyzym. Chapter 2. It's a Thursday afternoon in February, and if Harry finishes 3 more reports, he can go get a gelato from the shop down the road. This is his life now, this sad little bargaining system he set up with himself. Do your work and get a treat, like he's a spoiled kid or a dog with an incontinence problem. He's pretty sure that by 25 you're supposed to have worked out how to do boring stuff because it needs doing, and not because you've promised yourself ice cream. It's not as though there's anyone that he can ask, though, without tipping his hand vis-a-vis his own motivational methods. So there is the possibility that everyone does this, and he's not odd or abnormal at all. He doesn't think it's very likely, but possible enough to be getting on with. And he spent 3 minutes he could have been writing the report on the Siddlebaum case, thinking about the damn ice cream. Harry stares down at the swimming mass of demanding questions and half-written answers on his form and wishes that someone would come hit him or threaten his life or try to burn headquarters down or something. Give him something else to do. The ear-splitting crack that rents the air is a surprise and gives Harry half a heart attack, thinking he can actually summon evil at will before he looks up and sees. "Creature?" Harry says, his voice cracking. He casts a quick cleaning charm over his glasses without taking them off, but when he blinks through his clear lenses, the elf is still there, as nobbled and bug-eyed as Harry remembers him. His outfit is different, and is that a name tag? But the face is so familiar, Harry couldn't possibly mistake him. "Harry Potter!" Creature wails, throwing himself at Harry's feet. Harry stares down at him, horrified. He'd been afraid of something like this 7 years ago when he first sold the place, but after all this time, he just sort of assumed Creature was fine with the whole thing. It's not as though there had ever been much love lost between them. Whatever truth they managed to form towards the end there, Harry was sure at that time that Creature would be happiest under a master of the house who didn't actively want to die a little every time he stepped across the threshold. Says Harry. "Hi, Creature, what?" "Harry Potter must come at once," Creature says, tone urgent, wide eyes staring up at Harry filled with tears. "The master is in trouble and Creature cannot fix it. Creature tried to disarm them, but they hit Creature, and Master told Creature to get to safety, and Creature cannot disobey the master." He stands and wrings his little hands, bouncing from foot to foot in his agitation. "Creature's not even sure he should be here, except Master cannot protect himself, and the children, and the artifacts, and the house. So much precious history in Creature's hands, and Creature has failed. He bursts into hiccuping sobs and slides back down to the floor, clearly too overcome to continue. "Oi!" says Ron, poking his head over his own cubicle into Harry's. "I heard something. Is everything—" "Bloody hell, is that Creature?" "Who's armed?" Harry demands of Creature, ignoring Ron. "Who hit you? What children? You tell me what you're talking about right now." "The thieves!" Creature cries and howls, pounding his fists on the floor. "The thieves and number 12 Grimmauld Place! Harry Potter must come and save us!" He freezes, his whole body a quiver, and then sobs out, "Oh no, they are hurting the drawing room!" before he vanishes abruptly with a crack identical to the first one. Harry and Ron share a long look over the top of their cubicles before they separate. Ron to gather a proper team, and Harry to grab his cloak, wand, and rucksack and head for the door. It occurs to Harry as he walks grimly out to the apparition point on the sidewalk in front of the ministry that this might be a trick, a trap. It, after all, wouldn't be the first time Creature fed him misinformation to get him somewhere, and now that Harry thinks about it, he doesn't actually know who he sold the house to. It had been purchased through a holding company, but Harry's lawyer at the time had assured him it was a perfectly respectable buyer who even had some blood ties to the property. That had been more than enough for Harry. He'd been so relieved to get the place off his hands that it hadn't mattered much to him who got it. It's only now that he's bothering to consider the fact that anyone with blood ties to the old Black House might well be an unsavory sort of character. But Kreacher said they were armed thieves, said they were children. Harry can't take the chance of not going, and anyway, he doesn't want to. He apparates to a destination he hasn't thought of in years, and underneath the teeth-gritting, crushing press of traveling this way, Harry feels excitement spread warm through his body, his heart pounding, a lion's roar in his chest. This might be the only part of his job that he actually likes, but by God, he likes it enough to make up for the rest of it. He has to, or his whole life's a fucking joke. Harry lands at the front gate and stumbles a bit, breath stolen at how different number 12 looks from his last memory. Where it once had been dark and foreboding, sketched out bleak against the landscape in drab blacks and greys, the place is now almost cheerful, the black-shingled roof and wrought iron detailing offset with white paint and accenting green shutters. A carved wooden sign about 4 feet high is embedded in the grass next to the walkway up to the house. It reads, "The Modern Museum of Wizarding History, established 1999. Harry stares at it blankly until a crashing noise from inside the house, followed by something that sounds a lot like Kreacher howling, jerks him back to reality. He runs up the front stairs and through the door that's been left hanging open, and it becomes clear to him that whatever else this might be, it isn't any kind of trick. He knows too well what a house looks like and sounds like when it's been invaded by those uninvited. The first floor is wrecked, glass exhibit cases in shatters, chairs overturned with half their stuffing out and the wallpaper hanging loose in strips, but it's all clearly very recent damage. Harry thinks distantly that even like this it looks better than the last time he saw it. But he doesn't have time to focus on that right now. He can hear footsteps upstairs, at least 3 sets, maybe 4, and the sound of spellwork crashing and ripping, and something that might be a pleading voice. Quickly, Harry pulls his invisibility cloak out of his bag and yanks it on. Underneath its silvery cover, he climbs as fast as he's able to the 2nd floor, taking care to avoid the steps and specific spots of floorboard he remembers as being creaky. Memory's a fickle thing, though, and when he gets to the top of the flight, he almost puts his foot down on the only stair he's ever encountered with a bloodlust. Having blocked out its existence, more than forgotten about it. He stopped just in time by a little sign on a stick that pops out of his center. "Careful," the sign reads. "I bite." And then there's a little drawing of a stair with huge fangs biting down on a somehow helpless-looking ankle. Harry strangles back a laugh at the strangeness and hops over it. Landing soft and soundless on the balls of his feet, he creeps over to the door of the parlor, where the footsteps and voices are coming from. Draco Malfoy, of all bloody people, is sitting with his legs crossed on the floor. For a second, Harry sees red, fully prepared to burst in and Petrificus Totalus, this bastard, read him the riot act about how Harry did not testify at his bloody trial so he could be here robbing museums and terrorizing house elves less than a decade down the line. His better judgment takes over his prejudice, though, and he draws in a deep breath and sees the desperation in Malfoy's face. The obvious terror in the set of his shoulders, the way his hands are behind his back and probably bound. He's a hostage, Harry realizes. The primary hostage, Harry realizes. This must be his house, Harry realizes. He thought Grimmauld Place to Draco Malfoy, Harry realizes, and briefly considers just turning around and letting Ron and the backup team handle this one. He notices the children then, though, huddled behind Malfoy and all probably under the age of 10. One of them, a little girl with light eyes and skin the same warm brown tone as Harry's, is leaning against Malfoy's upper arm. Would obviously be clutching at it if her hands weren't bound behind her back. There is a woman with them too, pretty and young and dark-haired. She looks like she's been crying. All thoughts of turning around forgotten, Harry slips in through the half-open door and gets a look at their intruders. 3 men and a woman, all with the telltale shimmer of a recently applied glamour, all holding wands. 2 of the men are thick in the neck, shoulders and arms with the wide stances of professional grunts. The 3rd is slight, almost delicate, with a restless, twitchy sort of look to the way he's pacing back and forth across the room. The woman with them is of average build, neither fat nor thin, and sitting with her legs crossed on a marble-topped desk that looks at least a century old. She smiles lazily at Malfoy, spinning her wand around between 2 fingers. "What will it be, Mr. Malfoy?" she says, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Do you want to tell us where it is, or shall we be forced to search this room like we've searched the others?" One of the grunts holds his fist menacingly over a glass case housing a fragile-looking crystal vase. Malfoy's eyes widen almost imperceptibly, but his voice betrays nothing but haughty exacerbation as he spits. "As I have said a dozen times, I haven't the faintest notion of what it is you're looking for. If I did, I would certainly have told you where to find it by now, but as I do not, this interrogation tactic is as idiotic as it is pointless." Harry glances over at the woman to see if this remark has fazed her at all, but she just laughs. "So you keep saying, Mr. Malfoy. You'll excuse me if I don't find myself convinced." She turns to whisper something to the slightest of the men, who ducks his head to hear her, not slowly, as she talks. When Harry looks back at Malfoy, Malfoy is looking right at him. Harry jumps and then scowls at Malfoy, even though he doubts Malfoy can actually see the detail of his face. He's probably just an occlumens. There are a couple of them in the department, and the cloak never works on them either. Once, 3 years ago, Harry had been tracking a suspect who turned out to be trained in occlumency, and he'd very nearly bled out in an alley because of it. It's not unheard of people being able to sense him, even when he's wearing the cloak. It's just bloody annoying, and especially bloody annoying because it's Malfoy who's doing it. Malfoy's eyes flick pointedly from Harry's face to his right. After a second, they roll briefly heavenward and then resume their previous action, flicking from Harry's face to his right, from Harry's face to his right, where a set of clearly old, quite probably enchanted metal chains are hanging for display on the wall next to the intruders. Harry grins slightly and offers Malfoy a nod of understanding that, in all likelihood, goes totally unseen. What he should really do is wait to confer with the backup that is bound to be along any second now, but what he does is walk in careful silence across the floor to stand just beneath the chains. Reach up and wrap a hand around the end of one. It shivers down and around his arm until his grip on it is perfect, carefully and silently enough that Harry wonders if its magic isn't a little bit sentient. He wants to act so badly that it's all he can do not to rip it from the wall right now, but there are 4 of them and 1 of him, and children in the room, so he stands there nearly vibrating in impatience until he hears the slightly mangled attempt at bird call that he and Ron set up as a signal for situations like these years before. The chain sings as it whips through the air, striking the first of the grunts exactly in time with the sound of the front door banging fully open. The man turns in his direction and shrieks blue murder, probably at the way it looks like he's being wrapped up in a chain attached to and controlled by exactly nothing, and Harry casts an impedimenti jinx and then a body bind at the other grunt, who's already started to advance menacingly towards Malfoy and the rest of the hostages. There are footfalls on the stairs, and the woman jumps from the table, all lazy amusement forgotten, looking at the slight man in what Harry can see is panic, even through the glamour. "Go!" she yells, and Harry throws a curse after them but misses. Has to watch in horror as they both run and jump through the nearest window just as Ron comes crashing through the door. "Cool, Harry," he says approvingly, surveying the scene. "Bloody cool is what that is. You being all invisible with a chain of death and everything." "Window!" Harry gasps. The chain is heavy, whipping his arm back and forth uncomfortably as the man caught within it thrashes. As if it heard his thoughts, it slithers its way off his arm to bind itself entirely around its captive, followed shortly by 2 members of their backup team. 2 more are dealing with the man in the body bind on the floor. Harry pulls off his cloak and dashes over to the broken glass to meet Ron, noting grimly that the lawn is occupied with several additional auras, but not the dead or damaged bodies of any fleeing robbers. "Looks like mid-air apparition. A bugger." "Yeah," Ron mutters and meets Harry's eyes. "So, professionals, you reckon?" "Of one sort or another," says Harry, who's been doing this job long enough to know that the only people well-trained enough to make that sort of jump are law enforcement, hit wizards, or the kind of criminals nobody wants to encounter. Definitely more than your standard snatch and grab, that's for sure. Do you mind? Draws a hideously familiar voice. Harry turns, heart sinking, to regard Draco Malfoy, who raises one eyebrow and, despite being tied up and sporting what will probably soon be a wicked black eye, manages to look unimpressed. Not that everyone isn't enjoying the show, Potter, but there are children tied up over here. Guiltily and annoyed that Malfoy even needed to point that out, Harry turns at once and crosses the room, Ron at his heels. He decides to let Ron, who actually has a child and thus presumably knows better than Harry what to do with them, start with the kids, and waves his own wand to undo Malfoy's bonds first. I have told you already I will not play into this sick delusion, Potter, Malfoy says, loudly and nonsensically as he stands. Strangely, several of the children seem to be giggling. It is not healthy, and I will enable you no longer. You cannot continue to pretend to rescue people who are in no danger. My God, man, you've stooped to frightening children, innocent babes. Harry stares at him, incredulous. Malfoy, he says slowly, what in the bloody... So maybe, Malfoy hisses, dropping his voice so only Harry can hear it, and turning his face away from the kids. One of the children said, will Harry Potter come and save us, Mr. Malfoy? And maybe it was a bit of a stressful moment, and all that popped into my head was this impression I used to do of you in school. So I did it for them, and they found it quite funny. He smiles as if gratified by this, and then in a sterner tone continues. And of course, that useless wretch of a teacher they sent this time was just sitting there crying like a sad lump, completely unhelpful. So, I told them that it was all a bit of a game designed to appease your terrible ego, and the intruders weren't going to hurt us really, and soon you would be bursting through the doors and declare, I am Harry Potter, and injustice bows before me. And they'd all fall right over in an effort to preserve the fragile balance of your mind. He fixes Harry with an accusing look, as though irritated with him for having the gall to rescue him from violent criminals intent on torturing information out of him. But since you did, what say you reach down deep into that special sappy Gryffindor place in your heart and play along? We might spare some of the younger ones, at least, having nightmares tonight. Harry stares at Malfoy aghast. There's nothing on his face except, disdain and fury and cool grey-eyed superiority, and all that other stuff that's driven Harry quietly mad every time they've interacted since they were 11. But on top of all that, there's something that Harry would be hard-pressed to call anything but sincerity. And yeah, it's pretty weird that Malfoy seems to care about sparing a couple of children some nightmares that really doesn't line up with Harry's mental picture of the man at all. But, it's also pretty weird that Harry seems to have sold him this house, and that he seems to have turned it into a museum, which seems to have just been robbed. Also, like hell is Harry going to tell Draco Malfoy he can't put aside his own pride for the sake of some traumatized kids. That's the craziest thing I've ever heard in my life. You're completely mental, and I can't believe I'm doing this. Harry whispers furiously, but then closes his eyes briefly, sighs, and says loud enough to carry this time. You're right, Malfoy. This is very dangerous and selfish behavior. How dare I? Ron turns wide-eyed to give Harry a questioning look. Harry gives him a helpless little shrug in return, which Ron seems to take as answer enough. He goes back to spelling the children free. Several of them appear to be hugging him. Several others, Harry notes with mild horror, are staring in rapt attention at him and Malfoy. They do, as Malfoy said, seem to be the youngest of the group. The older ones are obviously more shaken and not buying their little show in the slightest. How dare you indeed, Malfoy declares at the top of his voice, and then in an undertone, is that really your best acting? Good God, Potter, how have you survived undercover work all these years? Ignoring this, for the children, Harry says full volume, I am deeply ashamed of my actions, which were deeply shameful. You've all shown me the error of my ways. Never again will I. Harry catches Ron's eye, sees that he is only barely succeeding at stifling his laughter, and closes his own eyes again to force out through gritted teeth, "Manufacture a rescue operation for my own selfish ends." "See that you don't," Malfoy says sternly, and a group of younger children, all of whose hands have now been freed by Ron, bursts into a round of spontaneous applause. Harry wishes briefly and fervently for death. Ron looks like he wishes he had a recording of this for posterity. Malfoy mostly looks surprised, though his face clears of all expression the minute Harry's eyes meet his. He moves quickly to begin herding the children and their teachers toward the stairwell, talking a mile a minute about fooling their parents and rescheduling their tour, and how surely he fixes Harry and Ron with a dark look as he says this part. The Aurors can be convinced to come take their statements at home if they need them. Harry glances at Ron and then nods his assent to Malfoy, who looks briefly pleased and then briefly irritated, and then carefully blank all over again, and who vanishes down the stairs behind his little group without another word. "Best boss in years," Ron says with feeling, and goes to check on the two intruders they caught. They decide that Ron will go back to headquarters to interrogate the prisoners, and Harry will stay behind and interview Malfoy. Harry puts up a good fight, and that he gets in one whole butt before Ron looks him firmly in the eyes, puts a hand on his shoulder and says, "Mate, all of you like a brother, more than some of them even, and you have many skills. But interrogation, no, you're not good at it, mate. It just isn't your copper. You know this. I know this. We have this conversation every time." "But," Harry says, and Ron says, "Mate, it's not happening." And Harry, who knows that any argument with Ron where Ron uses the word mate more than twice is an argument lost, throws his hand in the air and goes to find Malfoy. He's not in the rect sitting room or the rect study, but Harry finds him in the rect parlor, perched on the edge of a large armchair that seems to have a fist-sized hole through its middle. He's got his head in his hand, and Harry thinks he might be trembling slightly. Harry's surprised to feel a stab of something like admiration for Malfoy. This was obviously quite an ordeal for him, but he kept it together enough to shield some of the children from it, even to display some tactical thinking in getting Harry to that weapon. Harry's seen enough people in crisis situation to know it for the rare quality it is. Calm in the face of a storm. It would be one thing, less impressive, if Malfoy were calm by nature, but obviously, based on this moment, but also on basically every memory Harry has of him from school, it's something he has to construct for himself. "Of course, then," Creature says, "Thank you for saving us, Harry Potter," in rapturous tones, and Harry realizes that he's probably been standing next to the fireplace the whole time Harry's been in the doorway, at the same moment that Malfoy jerks upright, a mask of cool indifference slamming down over his features. "Oh," he says, narrowing his eyes, "you're still here?" "Aurors are widely known to linger at crime scene," Harry says mildly, "strangely enough." Malfoy scowls at him but says nothing, and Harry sighs. "I've got to take a statement from you, Malfoy, so we can, catch the criminals." "You wouldn't have to if you just targeted the actual ringleaders," Malfoy mutters, frowning. "It was obvious that the two who got away were the brains of the operation, but no, naturally you go straight for the muscle, bloody Gryffindor that you are." "Yeah, well, when you're trained in tactical analysis of hostage situations, you can decide who gets taken out first," Harry snaps, stung. In truth, he's been kicking himself for that very thing since the ringleaders in question jumped out the window, but it's not like he's going to say so to the victim. Harry reminds himself of this crime. He takes a deep breath and tries again. "It's really not difficult, I swear. I'll just have you take me through the crime, answer a few questions, and then I'll be on my way." Malfoy glares at him for a long, narrow-eyed moment before he abruptly says, "Oh, fine," and collapses back against the chair, seemingly either forgetting or not caring about the hole through the middle. He waves a hand at the settee across from him. "You might do me the basic courtesy of sitting down so I don't have to strain my neck looking at you on top of everything else." Harry rolls his eyes, but he sits down. "Would Harry Potter like some tea?" Creature asks, suddenly appearing next to Harry and leering unsettlingly at him, and Harry says, "Sure, In the same moment, Malfoy says, "No." They look at each other for a beat, and then Kreacher, who seems to be fixed in a suspended state of indecision, one finger twitching slightly. "Oh, fine," Malfoy says again, even more irritably than before. "I'll have one too, then. Maybe." And he raises his eyebrows at Harry as though daring him to say anything. "Put a little something extra on mine." Harry does not say anything, mostly because he's conducted a lot of interviews like this while the victims sipped on something to soothe their nerves. But a little because he's tempted to say, "Bring the bottle." Kreacher vanishes with a pop, and Malfoy puts one hand over his eyes, waves the other again in vague permission. "By all means, Potter," he drawls. "Ask away." "Well, let's start with this. What were they after?" "Oh my God," Malfoy says, dropping the hand from his eyes to stare at Harry. "Really? Are you deaf? Did you not just stand there and watch them threaten me and my life's work and, implicitly, every one of those children for that same information?" His voice climbs as he talks, nowhere near shouting, but louder, certainly, than normal speech. "I don't know, Potter. If I knew, as I believe I mentioned upstairs, I would have given it to them just to get them out of my bloody house." Harry flushes, irritated. "Well, how was I supposed to know that wasn't just, I don't know, a cover or something to keep them from getting their hands on whatever it is?" "Oh, because I'd protect myself and my unknown personal treasure at the cost of history and school children?" Malfoy sneers, a bitter twist to his mouth. "Not to mention a perfectly innocent wizarding home. Right, yes, of course. It has become so surprisingly easy to forget what a terrible person I am without you constantly popping up to remind me." Harry's mouth is open around a retort when Kreacher appears with a tea tray. It seems to startle both of them away from the argument. He can see his own slight shame reflected for a second on Malfoy's face, and he takes his cup without replying. When he sips it, he is touched to realize that Kreacher has remembered how he takes it and smiles at him. "It's perfect, Kreacher, thanks." Kreacher beams at him and scurries over to hand Malfoy's cup before he and the tray vanish with a pop. Malfoy takes a long sip of his tea and sighs contentedly. He's a strange creature, but Merlin favor whatever black ancestor trained him into his heavy paw. He regards Harry coolly over the rim of his cup. "Well, come on then. Let's have the rest of them. I haven't got all day to sit around and answer questions, you know." Harry sighs, wishing that he had given into this instinct and told Kreacher to bring him some fire whiskey too. Professionalism and rules for on-duty auras be damned. Instead of sharing this with Malfoy, he says, "So, you turned the place into a museum?" Malfoy stares, solely as if talking to a child. He says, "Yes." Harry imagines throttling him a little, but he thinks he succeeds in keeping it out of his voice as he says, "And this museum specializes in artifacts from wizarding history?" "You know, I don't think you actually need me for this interview at all," Malfoy says, tone mockingly thoughtful. "There are several other people around the place you could consult. Our brochures, for example, would be eager to help. I've had nothing but pleasant conversations with the sign arts out." "Are you always this difficult?" Harry snaps, needle to his breaking point. "Well, I've had a rather trying day," Malfoy says, drawling the words out slow, dry as the Sahara. "So you'll forgive me if I'm not eager to answer questions with answers so obvious it's painful. Was anything of value taken?" Harry says through gritted teeth, writing "you giant git" in the margin of his form as he does. It seems to be the magic question, though. Malfoy's body language changes and his eyes dart to the floorboards that have been torn up, the painting on the far wall that's hanging in ribbons in its frame. "They damaged far more than they took," Malfoy says, abrupt and miserable. "If they took anything, that is, I haven't exactly—" He stops and takes a long sip from his tea before he says, "taken a thorough inventory or anything, but I haven't noticed anything significant is gone. Certainly none of the more obviously valuable pieces." "Odd," Harry mutters, making a note of it. "Do you have insurance?" Are you actually trying to accuse me of insurance fraud? Malfoy demands, sitting up straight so abruptly that he very nearly spills his tea. Because I would never. You must be completely daft. It would hardly be worth the risk, and even if I did lose my mind and decide to give it a go, I would never damage the house itself. I'm not accusing you of insurance fraud, Malfoy, Harry says, holding up a wary hand. He's really regretting not asking Kreacher for the fire whiskey right about now. I am asking whether you have insurance, because it's a question I have to ask. On this form. Malfoy glares at him suspiciously, and so Harry holds up the form, pointing at the offending prompt. He's not expecting Malfoy to lean over, snatch it away, and start reading off the questions in a lazy voice. Target of the theft, we've done that. History of the property and or organization, yes, okay. Was anything of value taken? My God, Potter, you really don't deviate much from this question at all, do you? Except, I note, for this stunning gem of professionalism. He holds the paper up, much as Harry did, his finger pointedly beneath the words, "You giant git." Harry tries to grab it away from him, but Malfoy's quick and just used that move besides, and so leans out of reach, regarding Harry with a superior little grin, and keeps reading. Additional questions asked at our discretion may be notated here to be written out in full in final report. Malfoy raises his eyebrows at the form, and then lifts his face to direct the expression at Harry. Bureaucracy at its finest, isn't it? I must say, I feel ever so assured of the Aurors Department competence. Would you just? Harry says, and before he can stand up to snatch the form out of the bastard's stupid hands, Malfoy leans over and passes it to him, all innocence and grace, like he intended to all along. God, but he drives Harry up a wall. Just the kids. What were the kids doing here? Who are they? We actually are going to have to take their statements. We'll need their names. Is it a regular visiting group or just a one-off thing? Malfoy sighs, all the humour dropping out of his expression, his shoulders drooping slightly. They were the London Education Advancement and Readiness Network, or, he shudders slightly here, LEARN. I would like it on the official record that I'm not responsible for the name. So noted, says Harry, pointedly not writing anything down, and a little twitch of irritation this wrings from Malfoy is better than the gelato would have been. He grins, pleased with himself. So, what's learn? A verb no one ever bothered to teach you? Malfoy suggests brightly. Then, at Harry's sharp look, he adds in a much crosser voice, Merlin, fine. It's a group for area children from the Hogwarts list who are too young to be at school, but who still might want the opportunity to learn about wizarding culture. The pure-blooded families tend to take care of that sort of thing for themselves, but for mixed families and muggle-born kids, it can be a bit harder. One of the new Hogwarts governesses suggested it a few years ago. If I recall, she thought it was a bit cruel to suddenly drop the bomb of magic on 11-year-olds and their families, especially right before they have to go off to school. Harry, who remembers vividly having a conversation with this very man in a robe shop when they were both 11, and who will never quite forget thinking he was so out of place in the strange new world that he'd never fit in, thinks the governess was right. But also, yo, Harry repeats slowly, we're hosting, what, a field trip for a group of non-pureblood kids to study wizarding history? Yes, and isn't it tragic that the interlopers broke in right before I got the chance to eat them? Malfoy snaps, rolling his eyes. He takes a sip from his cup so deep that it surely has to drain it, and puts it down on the side table next to him with a savage little clatter. I have a group come through every month, Potter. You can check my guest logbooks. You can ask the children themselves, for that matter. Some of them have been here several times. And to forestall any questions about whether I stole any of my exhibits, or am secretly using this operation to launder money for dangerous criminals, or whatever other nefarious deeds your lot might come up with to accuse me of, you can also feel free to check my other records. I'll have them sent by messenger. Malfoy smiles at him unpleasantly. I've kept very meticulous records, you see, in case the Aurors ever came to call. And that never struck you as a little paranoid? Malfoy gives him a long, cool look and then gestures sweepingly at the wreckage around them. It's not paranoia when they really are all out to get you, I believe is the phrase. And then Harry can't say what it is exactly, how he's so sure, but he watches the way Malfoy's face freezes, the way his eyes go distant and unfocused, and knows that it's all just hit Malfoy, the weight of what's happened here. Harry's uncomfortable all of a sudden in this ruined wreck of a room. Part of being an Auror is seeing these moments, is being with people after they have been brought low and made vulnerable, but, well, usually those people aren't Draco Malfoy. Harry can't think of anyone who he'd want to see him fall apart less, and he stands up abruptly, folds the forms and slides it into his pockets. That's going to be all for now, I think. Wait, what? Malfoy wrenches his gaze from where it had been fixed in misery on the far wall to stare at him in outrage. That's all your additional questions. This is what your discretion has deemed an appropriate amount of inquiry. A crime was committed here today, Potter. The culprits are still at large. Harry stares at the tense line of Malfoy's shoulders. He hears the sharp note of panic ringing through his voice and realizes he's scared. Like any other victim of any other crime, Malfoy is frightened and unsettled and wondering what to do now, what he'll do if they come back. It's wholly understandable, normal even, but it's so bizarre to recognize in Malfoy that Harry stares openly. Just for a second, before he shakes himself and lets his slightly open mouth snap shut. No, Harry says, and as usual his voice comes out rough, not anything like the tone of calm reassurance he was going for. He clears his throat and adds as kindly as he can manage. I want to go through some of the records first, take some other statements, see what we get from the two apprehended, then I'll be back. Tomorrow, maybe the next day. I'll lull you for a good time. Oh, joy, Malfoy draws, but he settles back in the chair all the same, looking slightly mollified. And I suppose if they come back before you do, I should just ask very nicely not to be murdered, Or you could just call out for one of the other Aurors I'll have posted at your door, Harry says, equally dry. Obviously, the department would prefer the latter option, but you have to do what feels right, I guess. Malfoy says again. Then he nods sharply and says, Well, get out then, Potter. I assume you can see yourself to the door. It was your house once, after all. And Harry's opening his mouth to say, About that. To demand to know why in the hell Malfoy had secretly bought his property from him and turned it into some mad little museum that seems to attract primarily muggle-born children and thieves when he doesn't. He just doesn't. He's not sure why. He definitely still wants to know, but he doesn't. He picks his way back through the study instead, past the mutilated guts of couch cushions and throw pillows and what looks like a burn in one of the massive plush carpets rolled out across the floor. When he reaches the door, he turns to rig out Malfoy's tired frame, already curling back towards the hunch he'd been in when Harry first walked inside. Hey, Malfoy, Harry says, quiet and genuine. Malfoy looks up and Harry feels the corner of his own mouth pull up into a gesture that isn't quite a smile, more of a wincing, commiserating little grimace. Sorry, really? Malfoy's mouth opens a little and he stares at Harry for a second before he snaps it shut, looks away. He swallows. Harry can see his throat working. And then he gives Harry the sharp little nod. Then he ruins it by adding, Please do get out now, Potter. It's very rude to linger. But Harry still leaves, glad he said it. Someone has to be the bigger person, after all. To be continued. Thank you for listening to What We Pretend We Can't See by gyzym, read by Alamex Mabella. If you would like to stay up to date on upcoming chapters and stories, you can follow me on YouTube, Spotify, AO3, Instagram, or Tumblr.